This is the April 10, 1912, incident. The RMS Titanic was the biggest and most opulent ship in the world at the time. It embarked on its initial journey. It was on its way to New York from Southampton, England. There were people of all backgrounds on board, including immigrants, well-known actors and business people. They traveled to America in pursuit of a better life. The 62-year-old senior captain, Edward John Smith, was in charge of it. The public, media, and passengers were all quite excited about this ship. In addition to being the largest ship in the world, measuring over 269 meters in length, and higher than 53 meters, this ship's level of luxury was astounding. The ship's construction at the time cost $7.5 million, which, it's equivalent to $400 million now when inflation is taken into consideration. The ship's amenities and interior design might rival those of a five-star hotel. 2 magnificent staircases, elaborate wood paneling, and stained glass mirrors, Turkish bath, electric bath, and heated pool, a library, 2 barbershops, 4 eateries, a gym, and a squash court. Additionally, the type of safety measures that were employed in the construction of the Titanic, it was thought that this ship was unsinkable. The ship was so safe that it could never sink. This ship was constructed by a firm called White Star Line. In that sense, the company's vice president was extremely confident. His statement that this ship is unsinkable was made in public. However, on April 12, 1912, 2 days after embarking on its inaugural journey, the first ice warnings were sent for the Titanic. There was a lot of ice in the Atlantic Ocean that the Titanic was traveling across to reach America. This ship was in jeopardy because of the mountains of icebergs. These cautions are not out of the ordinary. Ships that travel the seas frequently use radios to communicate with one another and alert other ships in their vicinity regarding the presence of ice around and exercise caution when traveling. The Titanic twice altered its course to avert danger after receiving these warnings. However, it did not slow down. At 21.5 knots, or 40 kilometers per hour, it proceeded on its way to its objective. On April 14, 1912, 2 days later, 7 additional ice warnings were issued. However, these warnings were disregarded by Captain Smith and his men. They didn't slow down the Titanic's speed. The sun sets and the temperature gradually drops as the day comes to an end. The moon was not visible on the night of April 14, which was noteworthy. Without the moon, this night's visibility was poor and there was no moonlight. The ship had a crow's nest, which was a tiny platform at a height. It might be referred to as a lookout point. To keep an eye on the ship's progress, someone is designed to sit atop it. To keep an eye out for obstacles or traffic, the individual seated here must endure extremely low temperatures. The chilly winds were blowing quickly. It was also nighttime. It is hard to see because the chilly winds cause tears to well up in the eyes. A man called Frederick Fleet was perched atop the crow's nest around 11:39 p.m. Abruptly, a massive iceberg appeared in front of him. In order to warn those below, he rapidly rang the bell 3 times. Quickly grabbed the phone and dialed the bridge's cops. He yells that the ship needs to be diverted right away because there is an iceberg in front of them. After receiving this message, William, the first officer, indicated the engine room. Implies the ship ought to be navigated to the left. However, regrettably, it was too late. The ship struck the iceberg around 11:40 p.m., a mere minute later. The Titanic was a novel form of opulence. Swindon, England's Titanic left port. A large number of the wealthy and powerful were among the passengers. The American red time dancers, the band, and the gay songs. It was 11:40. The ship's right side was lightly struck by the iceberg. And she abruptly stood up swiftly. This was no little iceberg, it was as large as a football field, measuring 200 by 400 feet. And was so tall that it matched the height of the crow's nest. According to scientists, the iceberg weighed 1.5 million tons. The iceberg struck the front right side of the Titanic. In particular, close to the bow. What is the bow, then? As you can see in this image, the bow is located just in front. The protruded portion below is known as the keel, while the portion above the bow is known as the stern. The ship touched the iceberg for around 10 seconds. Then a massive dent appeared. As a result, tiny holes appeared in the ship's main body. How could that be possible, you ask? How is it possible for a bit of ice to rip through metal? It won't cut through metal if you use the ice in your refrigerator. But remember that amount of ice weighs. It's true that metal cannot be sliced by wood. However, even then, your metal car could collide with a tree and sustain total deformation. Likewise, because the iceberg was so large and heavy, it severely damaged the Titanic. Shortly after the impact, Smith, the ship's captain, and architect Thomas Andrews reached the scene to assess the extent of the ship's impact-related damage. They knew the ship would sink when they saw it. When they saw this, they were blown away. This ship was unsinkable, they believed. I had stated at the start of the film that this ship's remarkable safety features made it thought to be unsinkable. This belief was based on two primary safety aspects. This ship's twin-bottom hull was the first feature. The hull refers to the ship's primary body. Two layers would result from a double-bottomed hull. The spacecraft might be saved by the second layer even if the layer below was damaged. Second, the ship's hull was separated into 16 distinct, waterproof sections. The ship would continue to sail even if 4 of its 16 compartments were flooded with water. The ship wouldn't notice a difference. However, the iceberg's impact was on the ship's side. It turned out that the double-bottom hull was useless. There was only one layer on the sides. Second, 6 of the 16 watertight compartments were breached due to the magnitude of the impact. They were all filling with water. The ship could not be prevented from sinking because the limit was 4 and 6 compartments were inundated. The ship that could not sink would sink. At 12 a.m., 20 minutes after the collision, Captain Smith gave his crew instructions to broadcast a distress call. Perhaps the nearby ships would notice and intervene to save them. Jack Phillips, a senior radio host, ends up being our story's protagonist. He started sending distress signals one after the other, but no one responded. There must be a ship out there that would answer their distress call because he sent one after another. 20 minutes later, at 12:20 a.m., a ship named RMS Carpathia was spotted close to the Titanic. It picked up the signal. He instructed his ship to approach the Titanic after communicating with the ship's operator via radio, and proceed to rescue them. The issue was that this ship was 107 kilometers away, even though it was close. It would take 3.5 hours to reach the Titanic even if it traveled there at its fastest pace. Would the Titanic remain still for 3.5 hours? The remaining crew members fired rockets and flares in the sky, hoping that a ship in the area would see them, but regrettably, no other ship responded, with the exception of the Carpathia. Captain Smith, in the meantime, gave the order to evacuate the passengers using the ship's lifeboats. Women and children would be given preference to board the lifeboats in accordance with policy. The ship's occupants, on the other hand, weren't particularly afraid. The majority of the passengers thought the Titanic was an unstoppable vessel, therefore they shouldn't be concerned. Ultimately, the advertising company repeatedly asserted this. Therefore, even though they might have collided with an iceberg, the ship would not capsize. Because of this, just 28 of the 65 individuals who may have been aboard the first lifeboat to go down actually did. When the lifeboat was lowered, half of it was still empty. As time went on, compartments started to fill with water one after another. The ship tilted. The passengers gradually came to understand that the ship could sink. People started running about in fright as anarchy broke out when this revelation hit. The front compartments were so full of water by 1 a.m. that the vessel's bow was submerged. As a result, the Titanic's back section emerged from the sea. The rear propellers emerged from the water. Chaos reigned when the ship tilted this much. A brawl broke out between people for a seat in the lifeboat. The issue was that there were only 20 lifeboats on the ship, which was low. Which barely has enough for about 1,200 people for. However, the ship had about 2,200 people on board. The final lifeboat was lowered from the Titanic at 2:05 a.m. However, 1,500 passengers remained on board. Some people attempted to take their spot in the lifeboats during this pandemonium. However, some had remained in the ship and accepted their fate. The conclusion was tumultuous, with everyone sobbing, praying, attempting to board the few remaining lifeboats. Well, it ended up being really depressing. Witnesses reported that the ship split in two at approximately 2:20. And then started to sink gradually. The ship that could not sink sank in less than 3 hours. Of the 1,500 individuals on board, the ship either perished or drowned. Or those who were proficient swimmers, perished from hypothermia. The water's temperature was -2 degrees Celsius. You would perish from hypothermia in a matter of minutes if you fell into the water at this temperature. According to legend, Edward Smith, the Titanic's captain, continued to steer the ship until the very end and perished along with it. Some even think that he killed himself as a suicide. The RMS Carpathia, the vessel that had sailed to rescue the Titanic, arrived here about 3:30 and 4 a.m. to save the ship's occupants, but it was an hour late. Following the Titanic accident, many controversies and questions were raised. Investigations were done, and some shocking unknown facts came to light. How would you feel if I told you that another ship was located 37 kilometers from the Titanic that evening, which might arrive in time to rescue the Titanic's occupants? Indeed, the ship was a SS Californian. The final warning of an iceberg was sent by the SS Californian an hour before the Titanic struck it. They had issued a warning: be careful. The water is full of icebergs. The Californian ship's radio operator then turned the radio off at 11:15. Considering the danger, the Californian ship had halted for the night and was not proceeding. The ship did not receive the distress signal since the radio was off and it had halted for the night. The ship was so near the Titanic that the people on the Titanic's deck could make out the ship approaching. When the Titanic's officers began boarding the passengers, in fact, one officer said he could make out a ship in the distance, and that there was no need to fear because it will soon come to their rescue. But even after flares and rockets were ignited, this Californian ship did not arrive. According to reports, about 12 a.m., the Californian ship's crew had really witnessed the Titanic's missiles being fired. Stanley Lord, their commander, was even told, although he maintained that it was not a distress signal. Instead, it was the wealthy men who partied on the Titanic. Had the Californian ship's captain, Lord, taken the flares and rockets seriously that evening, the Titanic could have saved a great many lives. When they turned on their radio the following morning, they discovered that Titanic had sent them SOS calls. When they arrived at the location, it was already too late. Only corpses floating in the water were visible to them. Captain Lord of the Californian was held accountable in both of the investigations that were carried out in this case. However, such a massive catastrophe cannot be attributed to a single guy. Other people were also accountable. There weren't enough lifeboats, just like in the lifeboat example I gave. Because the ship's manufacturer believed it was unsinkable and therefore lifeboats weren't needed. Other than that, the Titanic skipper hadn't even practiced safety drills. On the day the Titanic struck the iceberg, a safety drill was scheduled. However, the captain decided they weren't needed because the ship was unsinkable, so he cancelled it. Steersman Robert Hickens, who was behind the wheel, made the next error. When the iceberg alert went out that evening, the officer on deck gave the order that turned the ship to the left. However, Robert Hickens misinterpreted the message in a panic and guided the vessel to the right, in the opposite direction, that is, in the direction of the iceberg. It was too late when he realized his error. A British investigation also revealed that the Titanic received many iceberg warnings and was advised to proceed cautiously. However, the ship continued to cruise at full speed. What caused that? There are a lot of ideas as to why the skipper did not slow down. According to a widely accepted notion, White Star Line's chairman and managing director, Joseph Bruce Captain Smith, was influenced by the company that built the Titanic. They urged him to keep the ship moving at its current speed. The firm put a lot of pressure on the ship to finish its first voyage in 6 days. In order to break a record, in order to demonstrate that the Titanic was not just the largest and priciest ship, but also the quickest ship. One particular instance occurred at 2 p.m. on April 14th. When Joseph was shown the ice warning by Captain Smith that there is an ice warning, so they should slow down. However, in order to keep the people and crew members from knowing, Joseph placed the paper in his pocket. He did not want the ship's speed to decrease. This one catastrophe permanently altered this sector globally. To prevent such catastrophes in the future, numerous new rules and guidelines were established. An international ice patrol was established in 1914. In order to notify the approaching ships of the icebergs that are on their way. It was agreed to sign the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea, SOLAS, which established new guidelines for ships. A lifeboat regulation, for instance, was drafted, requiring the ships to have enough lifeboats for each and every passenger. It took over 70 years to locate the Titanic's debris underwater after it sank. In September 1985, Robert Ballard, an American ocean adventurer, and the Titanic was discovered beneath the sea by a French oceanographer. Its wreckage was discovered 3.8 kilometers, 3,800 meters, below the surface. Two distinct sections of the ship were discovered, separated by 600 meters. The climate has begun to degrade the ship that is submerged now, so many years after it sank. This is how the actual ship appeared, and this is all that remains of it now. Its metal framework is reportedly being eaten away by bacteria and other creatures. This ship is predicted to totally disintegrate underwater by 2030. The Titanic continues to captivate people's attention even after 110 years have passed. Australian billionaire Clive Palmer intended to create Titanic 2 in 2012. A replica of the real Titanic and a replica model. Even so, he said, it will follow the same path. Every component of the ship was to be built identically to the original. The project was initially scheduled to be finished in 2016, but because of delays, it hasn't been finished as of 2022. People are reportedly uninterested in this endeavor because, should a perfect copy of the Titanic be created, because no one would want to use it because it wouldn't have a TV or Wi-Fi. The unstoppable Titanic 2nd of May have already sunk before it sailed.